Good evening, everybody. I'm Michael Loomis, hanging out here with you on Tuesday, March the 10th. It is a beautiful night in Southern California today. The weather was absolutely perfect. I could not complain one bit. Yesterday, it was a little bit of oh God, it was like walking through an easy bake oven yesterday. But today was a little bit nicer. It was a little bit more in the 70s. It was a little bit more on the humid side, but other than that, cannot complain one bit. And tonight, I want to talk to you about curiosity, time, and the future of human life. I, again, just uh, if you've been watching these videos, you know that it is my goal to make it to 120 years or more with a body that looks no more than 44, middle of what today we call middle age. And I I think it's just a matter of figuring out what it is that we are doing that is interfering with our bodies getting to that point, because I don't think that there's inherently anything that is keeping that from happening when there's plenty of people that are doing it, but it's just not that many. Um, but when it comes to interviewing these people that are centenarians, they often live a look just a slightly different kind of life, and I really do think that there are certain things that are outside of our understanding that are truly are things that are affecting longevity. And one of those things, for example, are is an idea that a friend of mine by the name of Jim sent me a little uh, thing for a meme that basically said if walking was the secret to longevity, then mail carriers would be the Eternals. I mean, and that is pretty much true. I mean, if, or the Immortals, Eternals, Immortals, whatever. Uh, so clearly, it's not just about fitness, just about doing things like walking. There's other things at play here, and I think at some point it's a matter of finding the right questions. I mean, of course I want to find the answers, but first you got to come up with the right questions. And I know I've been exploiting the current large language models we have available at our fingertips to try and find some of these ideas. But today I was listening to a lecture that really made me wonder how much more of it has to do with our mindset and the way we approach the world around us. And one of the things that the the person being interviewed spoke about was this idea of the mindset of longevity, and how perception shapes time, how we perceive things, what kind of social strategies and personal positioning can lend towards a greater quality and even quantity of life. um, and so I imagine that is the case, that there's a lot more to do with it than just eating right, exercising right, sleeping right. Now, don't get me wrong, those three things are absolutely necessary, but there's more to it than that. And I think that's what people like me are really trying to figure out. We're trying to get that all figured out. So centenarians often believe that they have all the time in the world. I mean, it's a mindset thing. What I got from this is that they don't feel like they're running out or that there's a limit to it. They simply live, and they believe that they have, you know, that they would not subscribe to a doctor saying, "Oh, you've only got 6 months to live." They'd be like, "Yeah, right. I've got a lot more time than that." And the idea is that this kind of mindset reduces urgency, stress, and anxiety, allowing life to unfold with patience rather than constant pressure. And I definitely see that in my own life, that there is in some sense a constant pressure to be productive, and it does seem like, depending on what country you live in, what just the mindset of the world you live in on earth, depending on where you live, your locality, can really have a lot of effect on your longevity. And that is kind of wild to think about. Um, Another thing he pointed out was how curiosity, in some sense, acts as an antidote to cognitive decline. And, you know, uh, I see that myself, in that I'm a student, whether it's me going to university or being an autodidact. Now, most of the time, I'm an autodidact. I spend a lot of time learning and contemplating and thinking and looking for better answers or better questions to ask. And gosh darn it, my nose is itching, keeps itching. But he mentioned that a curious mind continually forms new connections, stimulating the brain in ways may protect against dementia, which to me is a fabulous idea. Dementia is not one of those things that anyone should have to suffer through. I I don't even know. I couldn't even imagine what it would be like for the actual individual that is going through it, because you know they the whole idea of having a very short term memories span is interesting to me, because it's almost as if they don't know or understand that it's happening. And so does it really even bother them? Do they do they realize that their environment is now different if they're living in a memory care facility? Do they get that that might be their last habitation? um, and that's kind of the hard part. But living a life of curiosity keeps the mind engaged with the world. When people remain interested in new ideas, experiences, and knowledge, they maintain a sense of mental youth. Look, I'm totally sold on that idea, because as kids we always ask the question, but why? But why? But why? And at some point in life, we just seems like most people stop. And I don't want to be that guy. If it's going to make a difference in my life, I'm going to keep asking why. And it's I think it's we got to be careful what words come out of our mouth. And in the same way, we got to be careful about what words and what narratives and what themes play in our heads, because we are talking to ourselves all the time, 20, well, not 24/7, but you know what I mean. When we're awake, we're always having these conversations. And as such, we are building new connections within our mind, within our brain. So, I think definitely curiosity is a fascinating way to maintain youth, or at least a youthful mind, staying engaged with the world and steering clear of the things that are related to what we now call aging. Another thing I pointed out was gratitude and how important that is when it comes to aging. And for me, I have noticed that when someone pays me a compliment, it's almost like my first response is to want to say, "Oh no," when in reality, we really just need to be saying, "Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate you for saying that," or "I'll take that." And I agree with you. Don't say no, no, no. It's nah, 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 no. Say thank you. Um, Somehow or another, it allows the positive exchange to complete itself without resistance. And that is something I know I'm going to need to work on as I move forward, because when I heard this, I'm like, well, that just makes sense. Why would we tell somebody they're wrong when they're trying to pay us a compliment? It's not humility, it's just probably something I don't know, false humility maybe. um, the next point I want to bring up is how perception shapes time. In that, like me right now, I'm about 2/3 of the way through my spring break, and for me that happens to be a 2-week period because I'm in between sessions at my school, plus there's an additional 1 week. I get 1 week in between session A and session B, and then on top of that I got this extra week of spring break, so it's kind of nice. um, but the idea that curiosity expands the perception of time and monotony compresses it. Curiosity expands it, monotony compresses it. Don't be bored. Don't be sitting around being bored. When we explore new ideas and experiences, the brain records more memories, making life feel longer and richer. Uh, when you're doing something that is monotonous, you're not creating new memories. You're just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And the result is this would cause time to feel like it's flying by. I mean, maybe, I've had jobs that I quit because they were too repetitive and it didn't feel like it was stimulating my brain enough. And I just said, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I even gave up some really good jobs that had really good pay because I just felt like I was accomplishing nothing, just doing the same thing over and over again every day. Yes, the money was good, but it felt like I wasn't creating anything meaningful. And so I had to move on. And then finally, with this point, was the idea that language influences our emotional states, like using the phrase no problem instead of defensive or negative responses helps maintain ease and social interactions. Just be positive in the way you respond. Don't say no problem. There's really no benefit to it. Um, the idea of um, rejection. I know a lot of times people take rejection of something personally. The idea that if somebody rejects your idea, they're rejecting you. When in reality, they're 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 not rejecting you. They're rejecting the idea. They're rejecting what it is that you're trying to convince them of. And if you can just see it that way, just whatever it is you're offering to them, offer it to them as a gift being presented. And, you know, this way you're not going to be stuck in a position or a place where you're going to be needing to have to dig yourself out because you have feel like you have been rejected, which would kind of suck anyways. The other thing I wanted to really talk about was where we are at in time regarding technology. We have history to look back on in our modern history books where we went from a time like from agrarian culture to an industrial age, and people had to figure out, well, what am I going to do now for work? Now all of a sudden I went from being a jack of all trades to Johnny on the spot doing one thing over and over all day because of things like a steam engine or a factory position where they instead of one human making everything, making one whole item from beginning to end, doing all the processes and having like 25 of those people, what they did was they started by taking 25 different people and have them doing one step along the way in a production line. And that's where stuff gets boring. Stuff starts getting monotonous because now there's no more creativity. And you might be the guy in line that's putting a cotter pin in place and bending back the ends. And that's all you do. And then you slide it down, you get the next product. And what do? You take another cotter pin, put it in, bend the legs on it, slide it on down. You do that all day long. And it's those kind of jobs that create things like repetitive use injuries. They might pay a little bit better, but I think they just really take their toll on who you are spiritually. Um, so, anyways, we are at another inflection point in time where we need to start figuring out and asking the questions of what is the world going to look like in 10 years, and hopefully be able to find some pretty accurate answers so that as you invest in yourself currently, you know that what you're investing in now is going to pay dividends at the right time 5, 10, 15 years down the road, which I'm not even sure is possible. I'm trying to figure some of that stuff out for me currently. But, you know, every time there has been a revolution in technology, some jobs went away, but those technologies created new jobs. And one way to think about that is that, we went from a world that had flip phones with buttons on the inside with no applications and no big screens on them to a device all of a sudden in 2007 or 2000, I think it was 2007, the iPhone comes along. And some people thought, well, that's just crazy. Nobody's going to use a phone that doesn't have buttons that you can't feel. And guess what? Now everybody has one. No more buttons. I mean, my younger daughter, almost 21 years old, has never had a phone that has ever had any buttons. Period. I'm not even, I mean, I'm sure she could figure out how to use one. But when before we had iPhones, before we had Android, we didn't have things like Instagram. We didn't have things like Snapchat. We didn't have things like WhatsApp. Why? There was no reason for them. We didn't have FaceTime. Why? There was no basis by which we could use them. We needed this little thing right here to make it possible. And so this in turn comes along, this technology in turn comes along, and it eliminates the job of making buttons for a phone, but it creates a new job for a programmer to create an Instagram. It ushers in ages of creativity that make our lives easier. And so these are the kind of things we need to figure out, because I like to work with ChatGPT, and I ask questions like, what are the technologies that we're seeing unfold today? What kind of jobs, or what are the potential things that are going to result from that? And that, I think, is the right way to look at it. Um, no question in my mind that technology and artificial intelligence is not going to do the same thing that the industrial age did with the pre-industrial age, and that the the current age that we're in didn't do to the industrial age. Uh, and then think about things like self-driving cars. It's essentially a robot that and a technology that is not only able to remove the responsibility of driving from the driver, but when you look at the statistics, they are incredibly, by leaps and bounds, safer than human drivers. And there's a lot of humans out there that just cannot wrap their heads around that. But what about what if that, whatever? I don't care. There's millions of people a year dying because of other humans behind the wheel of cars. And with all of the self-driving vehicles they have out there now, and the driverless cabs that they have, taxis, the numbers are they're insanely safe compared to humans. And if there are no humans on the road that driving along with them, they're just going to get safer and safer, and the cost of being able to get around is going to go way down. The reality is we're probably not going to be having these big old buses driving up and down the road anymore, because these cars are going to be ubiquitous. They're going to be everywhere. The cost is going to go down through the floor. And That's just the future we live in. Uh, I just and to think it's all because of the iPhone, basically. And how w- before the iPhone, we did not have navigation like we do today. We now have personal navigation devices in our pockets, and they cost nothing, zero. But go back to 30 years ago in the late 1990s, if you wanted to have navigation in your car, you were spending probably close to $3,000, and it hardly worked at all. I mean, it was rough, and you had to have big boxes in the back of your trunk that you had to put different CDs in depending on where you were driving at, that had maps built onto them. You had to pay for these maps, new CDs every so often because they were being updated, and they were clunky. And you had to put these antennas on the outside of your car that could pick up the actual where you were at on the road. I mean, I don't think people can fully understand the amount of money we used to have to spend for certain things, and now they're virtually free. And that's just the future we're moving into. It's not that we're going to have to figure out some new way to make a whole lot of money to cover the cost of things. It's we're misunderstanding is that the cost of all things are going to virtually drop out to almost nothing. Something that cost $3,000 30 years ago now is free, and you can have it in 60 seconds. Um, and so that's the power behind these modern digital platforms, major innovations serving as platforms for future technologies, and just a matter of figuring out where those things are going to go. Uh, You know, I think I'm going to wrap things up for today because, I just feel like I've said enough. Anyways, curiosity, patience, and adaptability may be the most important survival skills in this age of AI. The same mindset that supports longevity in individuals may also help humanity navigate these technological transformations that we are currently living in, and we're going to be seeing more and more of over the next 5 to 10 years. And you know what? We're going to make it. I know I'm only about 10 years away from the official age of retirement here in the United States. I look at what I'm doing with school and I realize that, wow, even if I do end up going to work, within 5 or 10 years, I'll be able to retire. I mean, I don't know. What I do know is by the time age 70 or 72 comes along, even if I don't want to quit working, I'm still going to be getting paid by Social Security uh, extra money. So we'll see what happens. Maybe that's how I'll pay for my education. I'll start working, make the minimum payments, and then by the time Social Security comes along, I'll just let that keep paying off my school debt. Or maybe I'll become a social worker and let that pay for my school debt. But, anyways, I'm going to check out for the evening. I'm going to make myself a nice big bowl of popcorn. And I'll see you guys back here again tomorrow night for another edition of Chew Digest here on YouTube. Have a good night.